In part 1, we saw how Israel and Iran became enemies, and how both sides built their war machines. Now comes the dangerous question. What actually happens when the shadow war becomes a real war? Hour by hour, missile by missile, decision by decision. This is what war between Israel and Iran would actually look like. Despite decades of hostility, Israel and Iran have so far avoided direct, full-scale war. Both countries understand that such a conflict could quickly spiral out of control and drag the entire region into chaos. But history shows that wars do not always begin with deliberate decisions. Sometimes, a single event is enough to trigger a chain reaction. In the case of Israel and Iran, several possible scenarios could ignite a direct military confrontation. One of the most likely triggers would involve Iran's nuclear program. Israel has repeatedly declared that it will never allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. If Israeli intelligence believed that Iran was approaching the final stages of building a nuclear bomb, Israeli leaders might decide to launch a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Such an operation would likely involve stealth aircraft, long-range missiles, and cyber attacks targeting key nuclear infrastructure. However, Iran would almost certainly respond. Tehran could launch a massive barrage of ballistic missiles toward Israeli military bases, airfields, and critical infrastructure. At the same time, Iranian allies across the region might open additional fronts. Hezbollah in Lebanon could begin firing thousands of rockets toward northern Israel. Militias aligned with Iran in Syria and Iraq might launch drone or missile attacks on Israeli positions. Another possible trigger could be a major attack on Iranian leadership or nuclear scientists. Over the years, several Iranian nuclear scientists have been assassinated in operations widely attributed to Israeli intelligence. If such an operation targeted a very high-ranking figure inside Iran's military or political leadership, Tehran might decide that retaliation was unavoidable. A third possible trigger involves the increasingly dangerous environment in Syria. For years, Israel has conducted airstrikes against Iranian-linked targets inside Syrian territory. If one of these strikes caused massive casualties among Iranian personnel, it could push both sides closer to open conflict. In all of these scenarios, the danger is escalation. Each response invites another response. And once missiles begin flying between two powerful states, controlling the pace of events becomes extremely difficult. If a direct war between Israel and Iran ever began, the first 48 hours would likely determine the course of the entire conflict. Military planners on both sides understand that the opening phase of war is critical. In a possible scenario, the conflict could begin with a sudden Israeli air operation targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Israeli stealth fighters, supported by long-range missiles and cyber warfare units, might attempt to strike key facilities such as uranium enrichment sites and missile bases. At the same time, Israel would likely activate its air defense systems and place its entire military on maximum alert. Within hours, Iran would almost certainly retaliate. Iran's response could involve a large-scale missile attack designed to overwhelm Israel's missile defense network. Hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones could be launched in coordinated waves toward Israeli cities, air bases, and military installations. While Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow defense systems would intercept many incoming projectiles, some missiles could still reach their targets. Civil defense sirens would sound across Israeli cities as the population rushed to shelters. But the battlefield would not be limited to Israel and Iran alone. Within the first day of the conflict, Hezbollah in Lebanon could open a northern front. Thousands of rockets stored across southern Lebanon might begin striking Israeli territory. Israeli forces would then face the difficult challenge of fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Meanwhile, Israeli air power would likely begin striking Iranian military infrastructure across the region. Targets might include missile storage sites, drone bases, and command centers connected to Iranian operations. Cyber warfare would also play a major role. Both countries possess sophisticated cyber capabilities capable of targeting communications networks, power grids, and military command systems. Within just 48 hours, the conflict could already involve multiple battlefronts stretching across the Middle East, and the world would begin asking a dangerous question. Could this war remain regional, or was it about to become something much larger? If a direct war between Israel and Iran began, the conflict would almost certainly spread beyond the borders of those two countries. In fact, many military analysts believe that a regional war would be nearly unavoidable. This is because Iran does not rely only on its own military forces. Over the past 2 decades, Tehran has built a network of allied groups across the Middle East. These groups are often referred to as Iran's axis of resistance. They include Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Iraq and Syria, and armed groups operating in different parts of the region. In the event of a major war with Israel, these groups could become active participants in the conflict. The most powerful among them is Hezbollah. Based in Lebanon, Hezbollah possesses a massive arsenal of rockets and missiles. Some estimates suggest the group may have more than 100,000 rockets capable of striking deep into Israeli territory. If Hezbollah launched a full-scale attack, northern Israel could face an intense and sustained rocket campaign. Israeli military planners have long warned that such a scenario would be far more destructive than previous conflicts in Gaza. At the same time, Iranian-aligned militias in Iraq and Syria could launch drone and missile attacks against Israeli interests or allied forces in the region. Even maritime routes might become dangerous. Iran has significant capabilities in naval warfare within the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil shipping routes, could suddenly become a major flashpoint. If that happened, the economic consequences would spread far beyond the Middle East. Oil prices could surge dramatically, global markets could panic, and international pressure to end the war would increase rapidly. Within days, what began as a bilateral conflict could transform into a multi-front regional war stretching from Lebanon to the Persian Gulf. Whenever a major conflict erupts in the Middle East, one question quickly emerges. What role will the United States play? For decades, the United States has been Israel's closest military and strategic ally. The two countries cooperate extensively in intelligence sharing, missile defense technology, and military planning. Because of this relationship, many analysts believe that if Israel faced an existential military threat, the United States would likely provide some form of support. However, that support could take several different forms. At the most basic level, the United States might supply additional missile defense systems, intelligence data, and military equipment to help Israel defend itself. American naval forces already maintain a strong presence in the region. Aircraft carriers and naval strike groups operating in nearby waters could provide defensive capabilities or launch precision strikes if necessary. But direct military involvement would be a much more serious step. If Iranian missiles targeted U.S. military bases or American forces stationed in the Middle East, Washington could respond with its own military operations. This could involve airstrikes against Iranian military infrastructure, cyber operations, or naval engagements in the Persian Gulf. Such actions would dramatically expand the scale of the war. Instead of a regional confrontation between Israel and Iran, the conflict could evolve into a major international crisis involving one of the world's most powerful militaries. For this reason, both Iran and the United States have historically tried to avoid direct military confrontation. Yet, in the chaos of a rapidly escalating war, controlling events might become extremely difficult. One of the most frightening questions surrounding a potential Israel-Iran war involves nuclear weapons. Although Israel has never officially confirmed possessing nuclear arms, most international experts believe the country maintains a small but sophisticated nuclear arsenal. This policy of ambiguity has been part of Israel's strategic doctrine for decades. Iran, on the other hand, insists that its nuclear program is designed only for peaceful purposes. However, the possibility that Iran could eventually develop nuclear weapons has been a major source of tension in the region. In a conventional conflict between Israel and Iran, nuclear weapons would almost certainly remain a last resort. Using such weapons would carry enormous political, humanitarian, and environmental consequences. It would also risk triggering an international response from major global powers. However, in extreme scenarios where a country believed its survival was at stake, nuclear deterrence could become part of the strategic calculation. Military planners often describe nuclear weapons primarily as tools of deterrence rather than battlefield weapons. Their purpose is not necessarily to be used, but to prevent enemies from pushing a conflict too far. In the context of an Israel-Iran war, the presence of nuclear capabilities could actually create a strange and dangerous balance. Both sides might avoid certain actions precisely because the consequences could become catastrophic, but the risk would always remain. And that is why many analysts believe preventing such a war in the first place is far safer than trying to control one once it has already begun. After examining the military capabilities of both countries, one question naturally comes to mind. If a direct war between Israel and Iran actually happened, who would win? The answer is far more complicated than it might first appear. Israel has one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. Its air force is highly trained and equipped with modern stealth aircraft, precision-guided weapons, and sophisticated intelligence systems. Israel also possesses advanced missile defense networks designed to intercept incoming rockets and ballistic missiles. These advantages could allow Israel to strike key targets with remarkable precision. However, Iran has strengths of its own. It is a much larger country with a far bigger population and significantly greater geographic depth. Iran also possesses thousands of ballistic missiles and a large network of regional allies. This means that even if Israel achieved air superiority, Iran could still launch repeated missile attacks and activate multiple fronts through allied forces. Another important factor is distance. The two countries do not share a border. Any sustained military campaign would require long-range operations, logistics planning, and complex coordination across the region. In reality, a direct Israel-Iran war would likely not produce a clear or quick victory for either side. Instead, it could become a prolonged and destructive conflict involving multiple countries and enormous economic damage. In other words, the real outcome might not be victory for one side, but heavy losses for everyone involved. While the military consequences of a major Middle Eastern war would be severe, the economic consequences could be just as dramatic. The Middle East plays a critical role in the global energy market. Several of the world's largest oil producers are located in the region, and vast amounts of energy pass through narrow maritime choke points every day. One of the most important of these choke points is the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves through this narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. If a war between Israel and Iran expanded across the region, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz could be disrupted or even temporarily blocked. Even the threat of such disruption could send shockwaves through global markets. Oil prices might surge rapidly, potentially reaching levels not seen in decades. Higher energy prices would increase transportation costs, raise manufacturing expenses, and push inflation higher in many countries. Stock markets could react with panic. Governments across the world would face pressure to stabilize their economies while also responding to the growing geopolitical crisis. In short, a regional war in the Middle East would not remain a regional problem. Its economic impact could be felt in cities and industries across the entire planet. After exploring all of these scenarios, a final question remains. Could a direct war between Israel and Iran actually be avoided? Despite years of hostility, both countries have so far managed to avoid direct, full-scale conflict. This is not simply because tensions are low. In fact, tensions have often been extremely high. Instead, the reason lies in a concept known as deterrence. Both sides understand the enormous risks involved in a major war. Leaders in Israel know that a conflict with Iran could ignite multiple battlefronts across the region. Leaders in Iran understand that a direct confrontation could invite military responses from powerful international actors. Because of these risks, both countries have generally chosen to fight their rivalry indirectly. Covert operations, cyber warfare, intelligence missions, and proxy conflicts have allowed each side to apply pressure while avoiding the devastating consequences of open war. However, deterrence is never perfect. History shows that misunderstandings, miscalculations, and unexpected events can sometimes push nations toward conflicts they never originally intended to fight. For this reason, many experts believe that diplomacy, communication channels, and crisis management mechanisms remain critically important. The rivalry between Israel and Iran is likely to continue for many years, but whether it remains a shadow war or evolves into something far more dangerous will depend on decisions made by leaders on all sides. And in a world where technology, weapons, and alliances are more powerful than ever before, those decisions could shape the future of the entire region.